takes this and he puts a magnet over it, and he finds that there are small particles that come up to the magnet. Some of them are angular, some of them are round. They look like this. In fact, he calculates by the weight of the amount of these spheres that he finds in the dust that there must have been about 10 tons for all of the dust that was available. They're about a 1/16 of an inch in diameter, the largest ones, and most of them, though, are smaller than a human hair. What could produce such an incredible array of microspheres? Well, if you had thousands of cutter charges going off in the columns and beams throughout the building, and they were under this incredible pressure, what you'd see is something like this. Tens of thousands or millions of tiny droplets. What's the shape of those droplets? When a liquid is dispersed like this, its surface tension forms itself into almost a perfect sphere. In the case of molten iron, those droplets cool and they fall along with the dust everywhere. He compares the spheres to a known thermite experiment performed by John Peroulis in Nevada, which finds the same spheres. In fact, we do another XEDS, and we find in the microspheres the same kinds of evidence. We have iron, manganese, and in the case of this known thermite signature, it matches basically. In other words, we have a controlled experiment to compare the results against. And for those who know how to read these graphs, such as Dr. Jones and others, this is pretty much of a direct match indicating that this is the signature of thermite. Dr. Jones is not the only one who finds these iron-rich microspheres. The EPA finds them in all the dust in the toxicological studies they're doing. They have no idea where they came from. They don't report the results other than just a tiny bit. They're curious. They sweep it under the rug. It has only one possible formation, and that is from liquid molten iron under extreme pressure. R.J. Lee finds the iron-rich microspheres on top of the Deutsche Bank building in their toxicological studies. Is this what corroded the tops of these cars? This atomized thermite, cooling. Manganese was also found in large proportions, very toxic stuff from the city's chief medical examiner. Very, very concerned about it. Well, Dr. Jones concludes that given the mix of trace metals present in these high concentrations in the dust, such as zinc, copper, manganese, and the formation of iron-rich aluminum spheres, it's clear that significant aluminothermic reactions occur, and he can reverse engineer this and suggest to us that there must have been in the thermite mix powders of aluminum, iron oxide, copper oxide, zinc nitrate, and potassium permanganate. Well, would there possibly be any unignited thermite pieces in the World Trade Center dust? Indeed, he finds it. It also comes up to the magnet from his dust samples. Many chips. This one, a 1/16 of an inch long, red on one side, gray on the other. The red side is composed of tiny iron oxide particles and aluminum. In fact, he does an XEDS on this stuff too, and he finds a little bit of sulfur, more aluminum, lots of iron, and manganese. And compare that to the traditional thermite, it's also a match for unignited thermite. This stuff is not made in a cave in Afghanistan. The Lawrence Livermore Lab came out with papers only a year or two ago about this stuff. The particles being so small allow for almost instantaneous ignition between the two chemicals, the aluminum and the iron oxide, producing very explosive results. Los Alamos Lab and Lawrence Livermore Lab have produced these results. Then he continues his study and finds additional chips that are partially ignited, with spheres embedded in them, indicating that the source of the spheres is, for all intents and purposes, identified very clearly here. Partially reactive thermite. These results are documented in a peer-reviewed journal, in the Open Civil Engineering Journal. Volume 2. 14 points of agreement, he calls it, with official government reports on the World Trade Center destruction, because it turns out that there is much in common between the NIST report, the FEMA report, and the work that we are doing. And of course, there's much disagreement as well. But Dr. Jones is an optimist. So we're going to look for the points of agreement. He's also documented this in Applying the Scientific Method, which is on our website, ae911truth.org, also on journalof911studies.com. With Dr. Jones and his small team of scientists, through EDS, XRF, and WDS, identifies the components of these spheres and chips, predominantly iron, along with aluminum, oxygen, silicon, 1,3-diphenylpropane. The results, coupled with the visual evidence, he says, at the scene, such as the flowing hot liquid metal, providing compelling evidence that thermite reaction compounds were deliberately placed in both World Trade Center towers and Building 7. Verify the results, please. This must be repeatable. There's lots of dust out there. We encourage everyone who has any samples of this dust to email us at ae911truth.org so that we can get repeatable samplings done. We need a lot of this. Now, all of this is direct evidence of explosive destruction in Building 7. We'll jump back to only Building 7 now. Now, none of these characteristics can be explained by fire, let alone all of them. Why? Well, buildings are protected from fire. High-rise steel frame buildings in particular have 2- and 3-hour fire protection designed to allow the occupants to escape a fire. But even after, in fires that are much longer than 2 hours, larger, these buildings have not collapsed. Why? Let's take a look. Here's New York, 1970, burned 6 hours over 5 floors. Los Angeles, 3.5 hours over 5 floors. Philadelphia, 18 hours over 8 floors. Caracas, Venezuela, burned 17 hours over 26 floors. Not one of these fires brought these high-rises down. In fact, no steel frame high-rise building has ever been brought down by any fire. Yet relatively small and randomly placed fires and a whole lot of smoke is to have brought this skyscraper, Building 7, down in 6.5 seconds after burning in just that afternoon. How about that FEMA report and these investigations? Well, we had 4 investigations, starting in 2001 with the ASCE, American Society of Civil Engineers. We're told these are volunteers, but these are not your average PTA volunteers. These guys earn $10 million annually, average, between them, working for the Defense Department with their expertise mainly on blast resistance of buildings. Then we have the FEMA report in 2002, which finally got some funding, $600,000. Compare that to the $40 million effort to find out the source of those stains on Monica Lewinsky's dress. This is easily the 3rd worst structural failure in modern history. It deserves a far greater response and resources. In 2002, we had the Silverstein-Weidlinger report, responsible for reversing the theory of FEMA, which came up basically with the pancake theory, or the zipper theory, where one truss pulled away from the columns and then caused the others to pull away, and that chain reaction went around, and then the floors pancaked all the way down. We'll talk about that. Silverstein-Weidlinger report was responsible for changing that theory, because if that were true, it would have been the bolts that broke, and therefore Larry Silverstein, the overall owner of this complex, would not have been paid his $5.6 billion that he's been paid on the insurance settlement. Why? Because that would have been the building's fault instead of the terrorist's fault. So we had to have another theory. And the new theory states that the trusses sagged, pulled in the columns. They blame the persistence of that connection. And then the columns buckled, and then the whole thing came down. Either way, it's something that we're going to be looking at very, very critically here in a moment. Then we have the NIST investigation, which took over all of these investigations in 2005 and came up with a 3-year, $20 million effort. We'll take a close look at NIST's work. these experts who worked on these buildings all worked from the FEMA report